Thank you. So let me talk first about the Alliance for a Healthy and Safe Community, because in the recent past we tried to do a bond for a jail. And the bond came close, but it passed, and the bond was for a larger jail. And we heard two things. We heard, number one, that the jail was too big. We also heard that it didn't address the very important behavioral health needs that we were seeing in the community. And in that time, the behavioral and health needs in the community have gotten even more severe, and you'll hear more about that tonight. So what has been attempted this time around with the bond is to look at what we might need to do that looks at the jail, but looks at addressing the behavioral health needs in the community. It is a start. It is not an end, but it is a very important beginning for what we as a community can do to help our friends, our neighbors, our family members recover, get better, and stop the cycle of addiction, stop the cycle of crime, and have a healthier and safer community. So that's what we're about. That's what we're going to be talking about. Our community is in crisis. The number of people in our community with behavioral and substance abuse issues has reached crisis levels, resulting in severe overcrowding at the jail and the lack of meaningful treatment for those in need. Just as a quick background, I started in this business looking at substance abuse, and Lauren's smiling at me, in 1973. And I can tell you, it ain't got a lot better. In many ways, it's gotten a lot worse. It's time for us to do better for our friends and our families. We want a community-driven continuum of care. We don't want just a jail. We don't want just a crisis center. Just a jail repeats crime. Just a crisis center means people in crisis walk out the door, but the crisis recurs. Without ongoing service system, even adding more jail beds is insufficient. So this bond proposal that's on the ballot is a step. The bond proposal is $16 million to address the behavioral health needs and the public safety needs of our community. That breaks down into $14 million for the jail renovation and expansion, and $2 million for a facility that will house the transition center and crisis center that we talked about tonight. This is a little tough to look at, but really we're talking about a continuum of services for our community that would be housed in these two facilities. The continuum includes the crisis center, which is a 24-hour facility, voluntary, where people could walk in who are in a behavioral health, mental health, or substance use crisis. Police can bring them there, family can bring them there, people on their own can bring them there. DeVere Hunt will be talking about this in the near future. But it's a place where a person in crisis doesn't have to go to the emergency room, doesn't have to go to jail, but can receive help and support and hopefully directed into longer-term care. That's part of this process. Stabilization and treatment. Hopefully when people get into a crisis, we don't just send them back out the door, but you start to get them connected to important community services, important housing, treatment, rehabilitation, food, whatever needs to be done. We're looking at court and jail alternatives. We know that treatment works. We know that with the right array of treatment services, whether it's drug courts or mental health courts or wood courts, and in the name of it, with the right array of treatment services built over time, treatment works. We need to build that system in a continuum for folks. We have a jail that's overcrowded. Sheriff Nielsen will talk about that. It's over 20 years old. There's parts of it that need serious renovation. We can't just keep trying to cram more and more people into limited space. We also can't keep sending our sheriff's deputies transporting people to other counties when we'd rather have our sheriff deputies patrolling our streets and keeping people safe. Same thing with a crisis center. I would rather have 2 policemen patrolling the streets of Pocatello rather than sitting in an emergency room for 4 to 6 hours waiting for someone to be screened and observed in an emergency department. And finally, we need to look at community reentry. We need a good system of care because, I don't know if you know about, but if you look at where our jail is, probably the first most convenient stop when you leave the jail heading north into town just happens to be a bar. Now, I don't know if we all thought about that when we put the jail down there, but You know, it's probably, if a guy's been in jail for 6 months on a DUI or a multiple DUI, and the first place you see is the jail, it's a hard time to keep on walking. And so we need to think about a system of care that works on a continuous basis. I've talked a little bit about the crisis center, the stabilization center, the court, and the jail alternatives are jail and community reentry. This is important. What's important here in this process is that the bond is a start for us. The bond helps us take care of problems in the jail. It helps us with necessary expansion. It also helps us get a facility to really start looking at a transition in terms of better care, ongoing treatment, better recovery, and a crisis center for folks in our community. And together we build a continuum of service and treatment that we think for our community is a wiser, smarter, more efficient, and safer way to use our tax dollars. How will the taxes impact me? And we've left it up to the wonderful commissioner here to be able to talk about that in depth. That's what elected folks get to do. But basically, if your assessed value, and there is the homeowner's exemption, so if your assessed value is less than $200,000, you'll pay just about $2 a month more in your property taxes. If it's less than $100,000, you'd pay about $1 a month more. So the amount is not overwhelming. The return on our investment for our community is overwhelming. So I think this is something that we need to think about. We have finally a list of the people, the organizations in our community who have come together around thinking about this process that we have. I can't say that every one of these organizations is actively advocating for or against, because some of these folks can only educate. But what I am saying is folks have said we need a continuum of care and we need a continuum of treatment services, and we need to be smart about doing it. Let's not build pieces in isolation, but let's build pieces together in a way that works for all of us. And what we have is this proposal for this bond is 2 buildings that will help us start and get us going in the right direction for the future for our safe community in Bannock County. So with that, the choice is yours. The vote is on November the 7th. Early voting is happening now. It's really pretty easy. I went down to the old jail. Gosh, it was nice to go into the old jail and realize it wasn't in jail. But I went down to the old jail. It's very easy to do early voting. It's open now. The voting is on Tuesday, the November 7th. The important thing is to get out and vote and exercise your right in this wonderful country. We'll have questions during the presentations. There'll be more ongoing information at bannockcountybond.us. Remember that website. I'll probably leave this up. And then the Alliance for a Healthy and Safe Community has a Facebook page. Either of those sites will have information for you throughout the month of October and into early November. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can tonight. We'll get some of those answers on the websites. Those questions that we can't answer, we'll try to continue to answer and put those answers on our websites going forward. So, next on the list is our sheriff, Lauren Nielsen. Been our sheriff for quite a while. I'll let him talk about our jail and what we need to do there.
Well, thank you very much. This is exciting, and this is a little overwhelming. Like was mentioned, I've been sheriff longer than anybody else has, and I don't know what that says. Any other sheriff that we've had in the history here. Before I get started, I do want to thank the Alliance and those that had anything to do with putting this together, especially Idaho Central. This is a great facility, and what a great community response to be able to give us this forum. I was on the stump when we built the jail 22 years ago, and things were a whole lot different then. A lot of people say a building should last a little bit longer, but I want you to remember that I have approximately, 264 beds, and it's not a motel. Number one, I have to accept, I cannot put a no vacancy sign. The law says if they bring them, I got to hold them somewhere. These people are there 24/7, 365 days a year. I have people going around the clock, and this would be kind of like, and I mean no disrespect whatsoever, but most of them don't want to be there, and so they don't take very good care of it. You ought to see in an elementary school what the trash is when they empty it. You ought to see ours. And it also goes into the plumbing and a few other places. There's 3 issues that we're looking at as far as very serious to the maintenance of that jail. Number 1 is our lock system has not been looked at or worked at. We've taken, when a lock goes out, they're all electronic. We've taken and repaired 1 or 2 at a time. All of those locks are past warranty. All of those locks are, if they all go out at once, if the central control goes all out all at once, I have to shut that jail down and find another place to house them so that we can get that done. Same thing with the plumbing. We've been able to do all the plumbing on the outside, but the inside of the cells, the plumbing is deteriorating severely, and if that plumbing goes out, I have to shut the jail down, and I have to find other places to be able to put them. And the other part is security. Our security cameras and those type of things are also in need of being replaced. If that goes down, I do have to send all, and we're talking about approximately 280 now, counting those that are on the floor. And we've got to find places for them. I can't find places to rent the prisoners that I have now. We have contacted all the way over to Boise of who will house our prisoners, and they're all full. We're fortunate for some of the local counties that'll give us 4 or 5 beds at a time. But that is the problem that we have, and so part of this is going to go to the jail. What we're hoping to be able to do is when we get this addition, that we can take a pod at a time, put them in there, and then start renovating the various pods that we have. And we have 3 major pods. One of the pods, which is our minimum security, has settled down, and we have foundation issues with that on a flood that we had there before, and that whole rec yard is tumbling, and we have to replace that. How am I doing? I feel like I've got to. I want to say that we started overcrowding about 4 years ago, and we contacted the commissioners and let them know that the need was there, and we tried and we were able to put things together. But as we got to where we were starting to put people on the floor, and I'm talking on a permanent basis, they're on the floor. We have not gone without somebody not sleeping on a bed. For you lawyers in the area, that's a violation of the Constitution. It's a violation of jail standards. They're not supposed to sleep on the floor. I can keep them there for 48 hours. That's how long I'm supposed to keep them in the booking. We've kept them there up to 2 weeks at a time because we have no room. And you've seen the pictures on the news. We rent beds out when we have available. My budget for next year, this year and next year, is approximately $500,000. That's how much it costs. When we started having to transport these prisoners back and forth, I had to, and Judge Dunn is here, and he was shaking his head, but we had to get rid of our inmate labor detail, a wonderful thing that went around and helped both my inmates and also the community. But I needed those 3 officers to be able to go out and transport now. And I promised them it was going to be temporary, and I want to keep that promise. The other issue that we have is that we've had a high incident of serious criminals. When we built the jail, we had 1 cell pod set aside for females. I've had to remove 2 male pods and put females there. What is the problem that we have with females? Number 1 is that our drug abuse has gone sky high, and I'll touch on that shortly. But when you have somebody that keeps going out and then repeating and repeating. And as I've interviewed a lot of these inmates, it's 5 or 6 times. At what point does the judge say enough is enough? If you keep relapsing, you've got to be able to go and you've got to be able to take it. And so we've had that problem. I would dare say that the vast majority, if not all of them, are there on drug-related cases. We also have, if you take a look at the news, the murder rate that we have here, the homes that have been invaded, those type of things that we've had just in our county. We just have a harder case of prisoners that we're taking care of. I need to have secure, hard case rooms or cells and another place to be able to take those that are on work release. I don't have the time to be able to take care of the programming. Now, we've started great programming. Someone's going to talk about that later. But I'll end with this, and I've only got a minute. She's showing me cards. 2 weeks ago, I received a letter from the Office of the President of the United States. I wasn't expecting that. I was 18 back in the 60s, and that wasn't a letter you wanted to get. But the acronym is HIDTA. That's the federal government's definition of a high incident density of drug trafficking area. And I know the mayor's here, and he doesn't like the Chamber of Commerce may not like this either. 16 counties out of the whole United States were looked at, and we're number 14 on that. We're designated by that. Heroin and opiates have hit this place like a fire. And we'll have somebody else talk about that, I hope. We need some help. We've, as law enforcement, have helped you guys out. We're asking us to work together. This community can work together, does work together, and we appreciate your help.
Thank you, Sheriff. Pretty good?
Okay.
All right, thank you. He just set a good standard for you, DeVere.
That's great. All right.
So, next on the list is DeVere Hunt. DeVere has co-funded Rehabilitative Health Services in Idaho Falls. He was actively involved in the establishment of the Crisis Center, the first crisis center in Idaho that was established in Idaho Falls, and his company operates the Crisis Center in Idaho Falls. So he's here to talk about the Crisis Center and what's happening because of that.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. The Crisis Center is very important to me. I was approached about it about 5 years ago before it even came to Idaho. And so the opportunity for me to come and to provide whatever input I can to assist this community to have a crisis center is something I'm more than happy to do. A lot of you may not understand or know what a crisis center is, so I'll give you a little bit of information. The Crisis Center currently, it was established originally through Governor Otter and through Ross Edmonds with the Department of Health and Welfare, with the primary goal being to reduce the number of hospitalizations into the ER. Is that better? Oh, sorry. So the reason it was there was, one, to reduce the ER visits with our mental health population, and to number 2, to reduce the number of jail stays that we have with our mental health population, our behavioral health population. We have a lot of individuals that may be intoxicated in the community, and the only place for law enforcement to take them is to take them into our jail system. They can't put them back into maybe where they're coming from as far as a home. There may be a domestic violence situation. So there's various issues that go on there. So they ended up charging a lot of our behavioral health population with trespass or public intoxication, disturbances and things that way. And so a lot of our mental health population or behavioral health population ended up in our jails. Another large group of those, they may be suicidal temporarily. They may be dealing with detox. They may have just have some anxiety. They may be depressed. There's many reasons why they end up in ERs. In order for an individual to get into a private health center, such as Portneuf or into BHC or Canyon Ridge, you have to be able to go through an ER. And so the goal was to reduce the number of visits into those ERs as well. Every time they go into an ER, it'll cost your indigent fund or Medicaid or private insurance in the excess of $1,000 to $2,000 per visit. So the goal was to reduce those numbers in those locations. So I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of information about just the numbers that we have had in Idaho Falls in the last quarter. So in the last quarter, we have had 764 episodes in 3 months of individuals coming into our facilities. Of those individuals, 316 are unique individuals, okay? There are some that may come in, they may stay a couple of days. It takes 3 to 5 days to detox from alcohol, as well as meth, heroin, and any other of those drugs. And so within a 3-month time frame, we've had that number of individuals. And so how do we handle them as they come in? I'll talk to you a little bit about the staff that we have in the facility. So it's a 24-hour facility. We have a medical professional, which is either an RN or a medic, a trained medic that you would see in your fire department. And so we have those 2 individuals on staff, one of those 2 individuals on staff 24 hours a day. We also have case managers in the building that come in at 7 and they're there until 9:30 in the evening. Their primary job is we're kind of a catch-release program. What we're wanting to do is to catch these individuals before they hit the ERs, before they have these trespass charges or other charges that get them into the jails, which puts them into the court system, which ties up our probation and our parole. There's so much expense that goes into those. So we try to catch them and try to figure out what has led up to the symptomology, what's led up to the drinking, what has led up to all those different kinds of things. And those case managers try to refer them back out into the community where they can receive services. So it's a true interception point. So instead of putting them into the ER, moving them into a psych hospital, possibly into state hospitals, we can catch them before that all happens and try to get them into services. Same thing on the jail side. There's no reason to obviously the jails in the county here are already overcrowded. And so we can intercept that as well. So you ask those individuals that come in, of those 764 individuals, 351 of them were a combination of a mental health and substance abuse, both, okay? So they presented with a mental illness, and they also presented with some type of substance on board. Of those 764, 115 were substance only. So they either came in with alcohol, they came in with some opioid or marijuana or whatever it might be. They came in with just the substance abuse piece only. We have another 284 that came in that were mental health only. So they didn't have a substance abuse piece, but they did have the mental health piece that goes with that. We serviced individuals from 12 different counties. We had 46 individuals between Bannock and Bingham County that came into our crisis center in Idaho Falls. So right now you're transporting a number of individuals up into Idaho Falls into our crisis centers instead of having them taken care of here locally. Of all of those individuals, 48 were brought in by law enforcement. And so if you want to look at law enforcement hours, if you consider that 48 of them came in, for a law enforcement officer to come into our facility, they stay about 15 minutes. Come in, drop them off, we take care of them, and they move on back out into the community to protect our community from whatever else might be going on. If they go into an ER, they typically have to have 2 law enforcement officers, and they're 4 to 6 hours in the building at that time. Is that correct? Okay. And so if you consider that we had 48 drop-offs in 3 months from law enforcement, you can imagine the amount of money we saved. And I won't give you all the numbers, but I'll give you the final number. Within those 3 months, we estimate a savings of $23,308. You also take a look at those individuals that present at an ER and how many go into a hospital. 70% of all individuals that present at an ER with a mental health diagnoses end up in a hospital setting, such as Portneuf here, we have Canyon Ridge, and we have BHC in Idaho Falls. Of those 70%, 9% of them end up in a state hospital, and they stay for a minimum of 5 days in the private hospital and a minimum of 10 days in the psychiatric facility. If you take and combine all those numbers over a over a 3-month time frame, there's an estimated savings of $1,155,000 over a 3-month time frame. Now those numbers may not be numbers necessarily only being spent in your community. A lot of those numbers are numbers that will be through Medicaid, which is a state fund that we all have to pay for with our taxes. Some of the other things they talk about, well, what do we do if you have an individual come into the facility that is too severe for us to manage, because we're a voluntary facility. We have, during that time frame, we had 33 of our individuals, of the 764, we had to move on to a psychiatric facility. We had 16 had to go into a medical facility, and we had 8 into a jail. I didn't speak really quickly about some of the other staffing we have in the facility. We also have law enforcement, which is a security officer from Bonneville County Sheriff's Department. And we also have psych techs or recovery coaches on shift for 24-hour shift as well. The crisis center is imperative to help the individual. You can speak all day long about the financial gain. You can speak all day long about cleaning our streets up with having people that are suffering and having difficulties in the streets. But the best place to treat an individual with a mental illness and substance abuse issues is in our communities, in our programs, and not in our jails. The #1 provider of mental health services in the United States is our jail system, and that needs to be changed. Thank you.
Good shot. Perfect timing. Thank you, Devere. Next up, we've have Carrie Hong as our 6th District Trial Court Administrator, and Carrie's, I'll just turn the time over to you, Carrie. And
Thanks, Steve. Excuse me, everybody. I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, but I'll tell you, having the mic in my hand and having a timer in front of me reminds me of my debate days back at Blackfoot High School, so we might get a little dangerous here. As Sheriff Nelson recognized earlier, we're joined this evening by the Honorable Stephen Dunn. Judge Dunn sits as a district judge in Bannock County, presides over the mental health court and the Wood Court, and was very gracious with his time and was willing to join us tonight to maybe as questions permit or as where our discussion goes, to offer some perspective from the bench of what he's seeing in terms of the impact of unmet behavioral health need in our community. In terms of my assignment on this panel, I'm really here to talk to you today about the section labeled on your agenda as court and jail alternatives. What we've been talking about this in terms of the planning and the discussion for the coordinated response for our community, we've tried to encapsulate a lot of these concepts into the idea of what we call a transition center. And really it's my job to describe what that idea is, educate of what it might mean to our community, and why we're talking about transition center, court and jail alternatives, crisis center, and jail addition all in one conversation. And that really is ultimately, because we see that there's clear linkages behind how our community responds to behavioral health and where we can have different intersections of our resources, of our investment, and our attention as citizens in this county and in this district to try and address the problem. We don't have any single one of these pieces as the answer to the total question. There's a huge component that is the piece of the jail. There's a huge component that's the piece of the crisis center. There's a huge component which is the piece around the transition center. And they work together to give us a response that is not one-sided, that tries to look at and assess and respond to the needs of our entire community. Let me say this before I go further. As Steve mentioned, I'm a trial court administrator. I'm an employee of the Idaho Supreme Court. The last 7 years, I've been on the job here in the district about 6 months. For the last 7 years, I've been in Boise working for the administrative office. Don't hold that against me. I grew up here. This is home for me, and I'm happy to return. But I do think it's really important to just say right out front that the courts respect the question of how you as citizens are going to vote is up to you. The courts don't intervene in political questions. The courts don't intervene in policy questions. Those are the domain of the legislature, the domain of the voters, the domain of the executive branch. The court is uniquely positioned as an independent, impartial third branch of government, and as such, we take no position on whether you should vote yes or whether you should vote no. It's the court's responsibility to educate and discuss and really advocate for the needs that the court needs to properly administer justice, which is its task, both statutorily and constitutionally. So when I'm here today talking to you folks, and if Judge Dunn has remarks later on, we don't want to be involved in the political question, but we want to share perspective and share what the resource demand is for the court system to properly administer justice. The conversation around behavioral health and our community's response, I can tell you when I came back from Boise and within the first few months I was attending meetings of the people who in your communities who are passionate who understand the challenges that we have and really want to say we need to do something different. That the status quo in terms of addressing whether it's jail overcrowding or the lack of adequate and appropriate behavioral health care for individuals in our community who are at risk of incarceration is unsatisfactory. That right now we're in a cycle of perpetuating the same factors, the same conditions, the same kind of behaviors that ultimately lead us to having to address the question of whether we need a jail addition. Our conversation today is really about what does this community do to stop cleaning up on the back end of what happens when we have people who don't receive the appropriate services they need that matches the level of care, that responds to the impacts or the forces in their lives that are leading them to make bad decisions, to be engaged with the wrong people, and to be coming in front of our court system. Our conversation today is as much as we look at the bond and how much of it is about the jail addition, it's an opportunity to look at how do we get in front of this. One of the big questions that we've had in a lot of our planning meetings and discussion meetings about a coordinated community response is what is a transition center? What is when we talk about court and jail alternatives? What is it when we talk about stabilization and treatment center? And I understand at times that can be a bit of a nebulous discussion. But I want to share with you this, some key planks. As Devere mentioned, in the United States, not just in Bannock County, not just in Idaho, jails and prison have become the de facto institutions to treat people who are mentally ill and are abusing substances. That's the most expensive and least productive way to approach the problem. We know research demonstrates that people in the community who are receiving treatment, the return on investment for treating them outside of custody versus in custody is tremendous. There is a legitimate and important need for jails in our community. As a matter of policy, the legislature has set forth in statute, in the court and rule, the ability of the judges in the exercise of their discretion to order someone to be put in custody. None of the judges take that question up lightly, and the driving factor for that decision is typically when public safety demands it. When the court is in the position of requiring any one of our citizens to lose their freedom and be placed in custody, the ultimate driving factor is protection of public safety. So when we think about that, when the court is doing that and exercising that discretion, the person who's being placed in custody needs to be put into an institution that is safe for them, that is safe for the sheriff's employees who are managing that facility, and that we as a community feel good about that any member of our person is in that situation. So, for lack of a better word, a facility that's humane. Often you hear an adage about our societies are judged about how we treat the lowest member in our community. Many people come into the jail for many different reasons, and I'm not being reductionist by talking about how we treat folks who go to jail. But I think there's an expectation, and whether we want to phrase it in terms of jail standards or in terms of how we want our fellow neighbors, our citizens, our family who end up going to in custody, how we want them to be treated. I think that's a question for each of you to look at yourself. So, Transition Center, real quick, because I'm seeing I'm very close to time. When we look at Transition Center, right now, today in the Bannock County Jail, we have people who are there who don't pose any more risk to our community than people who are out on probation, but are in jail because they lack stability and they lack ready access to care. So they end up in jail. The jail does its best to provide services, but it's ill-equipped. We have some great programs, the SHARE program, for example, that tries to provide in-custody treatment. But as I referenced before, that's the least efficient, least effective way to address this. The Transition Center provides a facility that brings together community resources, that provides short-term housing, and provides the least restrictive option to safely place offenders in the community and provide treatment for them. So really what it is it's an opportunity for us to think about what is the meaning of transition. Transition is a period of a change. That period of change is not just talking about the offender who accesses the transition center. It's talking about how we as a society and how we as a community transition our thinking of what it means to respond to behavioral health in our community. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kerry. The challenge here tonight is I've got 5 people up here, each of whom could speak for an hour and a half without taking a breath, but so far they're doing a great job. But we've saved some of the better folks for last. Sorry about that, guys. No pressure, Alessandra. One of the newer programs in our community, and a very successful one and a very positive one for us, is the Hope and Recovery Center that opened 2 years ago, a year ago, working with people in recovery. Alessandra Toscanelli is a program director for that, and she's here to talk a little bit about Hope and Recovery, which is really what this is ultimately all about.
Thank you. It's amazing to be sitting up here with these wonderful professionals, and I feel completely inadequate, so we're going to just go for it. But as I look out, I see so many community members that I know. I see people that I know from other situations and from court programs. I also see people that I've trained as recovery coaches. I see the directors that then I work with on a daily basis at the other connection agencies. Essentially, my role here is to not be an expert on anything at all whatsoever, but I am an expert on my own life and my own experiences. I'm an expert in my own recovery, and Hope and Recovery works on that basis, that we are a peer-driven recovery support services center, which means that everyone who is staff has a recovery program that they work. It also means that all of our volunteers are in recovery, whether that is from mental illness, whether it is from a substance abuse disorder, or a behavioral addiction, or a combination of any of those, which would be a co-occurring disorder. They are in recovery. As we work with somebody who comes in our doors, the first thing they are met with is somebody who is exactly like them. We get it. We know recovery because we're in it. We're not telling them across the desk, hey, guess what? This is what you need to do. We're sitting there side by side with them saying, share with me. Tell me how we can help you. Tell me what is going on in your life, and I will walk alongside with you to find those resources. So any given day, someone will come in, and it might be a parent who says, hey, I'm struggling. My son or daughter is struggling with opioid addiction, and I'm really concerned. I might get a phone call that says, hey, I have nowhere to live. Do you know where I can go? I might have somebody who needs clothes, somebody who needs food. But one of the most serious things that I deal with is somebody who comes into the center and says, hey, I'm in immediate crisis. And I have to look at them and say, there's nowhere for me to take you. And it breaks my heart. So these conversations that happen about the crisis center are super important to me, because as I look at an agency program and where we can facilitate helping people, it is in Idaho Falls. That means I have to figure out a way to transport them across county lines, take them up there, and then they're away from their support system. They're not where a recovery coach can meet with them from Hope and Recovery from Pocatello. Yes, they have a wonderful recovery coach whom I trained. However, it's pretty cool to be able to say. But they don't have a recovery coach right there when they get out, because it's in Idaho Falls. We're in Pocatello. The other portion that I work with are the people who are coming out of the jail. We are a re-entry and recovery center, which means that as those people come out of the jail, I am one of the first people that they get to meet. I have the pleasure of being able to take Hope and Recovery's transport van and pick them up, bring them into the center, give them a snack, a cup of coffee, a bottle of water, a soda, and be able to sit with them and say, hey, guess what? I'm a peer. I've been there. I've been the inmate who was out at the county jail. I've been the person who was going through the court system. I was scared. I was in it by myself, and I had no idea how to fix my life. But I can walk alongside with you, and I can get you those resources. And from that moment, that's where real recovery begins. That moment of change that happens when somebody realizes that they are not in this by themselves. They don't have to do it alone. They don't have to have all of the answers. All they have to do is show up to our center. So we're a huge part of this entire recovery-oriented system of care. And by building a recovery-oriented system of care, it really provides the necessary net underneath people by which they cannot fail. So by building a better jail and expanding that, you give people a humane place to be. Once again, I'm the person who's been out at the Bannock County Jail. I'm now a program director. You have no idea where those inmates who are out at the Bannock County Jail will end up. You don't know where recovery will take them. You don't know their life path. But I promise you, recovery is possible and it is sustainable. Millions of Americans live in long-term recovery in the United States. While drug and alcohol addiction might be a mass issue that we are facing across the country, and opioid and heroin might be a huge crisis that we have more people entering the center and coming into meetings. We house 15 meetings currently per week that provide supportive meetings for sustainable recovery. And as we expand those meetings, we're looking at not just substance use disorders and mental health issues, but also grief and loss. People recover from that too, right? As a recovery center, we are wide open to any array of things that may happen in your life. What about people who need recovery from trauma? They need a place to go too, right? Al-Anon, Alateen are some of my favorite programs. I have the privilege of working with teens in our center. It's amazing. So whether you're treating the substance use disorder and the mental health problems, or you're treating somebody coming out of jail, or you're treating somebody who has a crisis in their life, at some point they will come and they will talk with me. And by using this transitional center, this crisis center, and having it in our county, we give ourselves that continuum of care. When I left the meeting last week and I was thinking about what I was gonna say, I went back to the center and I looked at this lobby full of people. And I'm gonna get emotional and cry because that's what I do. These are my peers in recovery. They all have names. They may have IDOC numbers. If they're like me, they also have a federal court number. But they have families, they have friends, they found a higher power, they found a purpose, they're giving back to their community. They're donating their time to go on suicide prevention walks in our community. They participate in city cleanup. This Saturday, Hope and Recovery and all of our volunteers who may or may not be inmates, may or may not be in crisis, may or may not be in these court diversionary programs, will walk up, help somebody in need at the homeless stand down at Reed Gym, and they will donate their time and their service. And it's in that area of community, of giving back, where I began to heal and find long-term recovery. My peers in recovery at Hope and Recovery do exactly that. We return to be citizens who can give back. I am living proof that you can go from an inmate who's been in crisis, who's gone through a court program, and is now the director, speaking out for the people who don't have a microphone in this room and need this facility to go forward so that they can have a better recovery-oriented system of care.
Thank you so much. That was great. Ken, do you want to follow that? Okay, Commissioner Bullock will talk about, he gets a really wonderful, exciting topic, funding. Anyway, Commissioner Bullock.
I'm sorry, but I got to stand up. I see people back here looking around. They're in front of them, and they can't see who it is. Plus, I want to see if my wife made it. Oh, there she is. So I want to thank you for being here. But in addition to that, we have been meeting for 6, 7, 8 months. I was a newcomer to this. Let me tell you, I was as green as anybody ever was. There's been a lot of wonderful people who have educated me. Told me that there's a better way of doing things than the way we've been doing them, and you guys have done that. I want to talk a little bit about that. The word opioid has been thrown out here, like all of us know exactly what that is. This country is in an opioid epidemic. Do you know what opioids are? You probably have them in your home. When's the last time you checked your own medicine cabinet? Opioids or Vicodin, Oxycontin, oxycodone. I went and looked at my medicine cabinet, and I've got one from a dentist, one from a doctor. They tell me they're worth $20 a pill on the street. And your children know where they can sell them tomorrow. They will know. We're not talking about drug abuse by gangs. We're talking about youth who may need some money. They get into addicted. Our opioid is much more than criminals. They may not even go through our jails. And the other thing I want to make sure you understand is this transition center, behavioral center we call it, it's as much self-admitting as it is with coercion by an officer. We want people to know that they can walk in off the street, and we're there to help them in whatever community resource. One of the other things I want to make sure everybody understands here, we are not replacing any community program. We want to be the resource place that they can come to us, and we can refer them to Bill, to Bob, to Allie, and refer them to the hospital if necessary. We're here to use the community. This is a community-driven. We need to understand that. This is a community-driven process. The interesting thing about it is I really do get to talk about the money side of it, because I know there's a lot of cards here that are going to talk about the money side of it. It's going to cost, on our bond language, when you go to vote, there's going to be a bond proposal in there that says we need $16 million, approximately 14 for the jail, expansion, remodel, whatever we need to do, as the sheriff has talked about. The other approximately $2 million is going to go to a facility. And so we don't take credit where it isn't due. We do have an organization in Pocatello that is going to buy the building. The $2 million is for remodeling. So we're already leveraging money inside of this community. Portneuf Health Trust has agreed to purchase. We think we have a building. We're not announcing it yet, but we think we have it there. It will be close to the center of town. It is not going to be out by the jail. It is close to center of town. The one thing we want you to know, and turn that clock off for a second, because this is answering some questions in advance. Anyway, we would love to have people, when they're released from the jail, to be released in this transition center. That's the place they ought to be released, not out there. They ought to be released to some place where we have a caseworker that literally can be assigned to them and point them in the direction where they know there's some future help. So it is a community-based thing. We want everybody to understand that. The financing for the $16 million is coming from your votes. It's a $16 million vote. Our county assessed value is $4.4 and a little over $4 billion. Okay, at today's market rate at 2.38% interest, the annual payment is going to be $1.1 million. Okay, now all you mathematicians, pay attention. We are already budgeting $500,000 to put them somewhere else in a year's time. We have on average 18 inmates somewhere else besides Bannock County every night. With those transportation costs, that's 5,800 beds per year. Got that figured out? 5,800 beds. We're paying somebody else to house them. We have to haul them back and forth for arraignment, for all of the other stuff that we deal with them here because of judges. They have to have them back and forth. We are obligated to do that if we're going somewhere else. That's $500,000 that you are already spending in the county budget. In addition to that, we're already spending $720,000 budgeted in this next year for mental health, substance abuse, and social services. We're already committed to spending it. We're already spending it. We just think there's a more effective way of doing it. Many of the people that we're spending money for are community resources, which we continue to want as partners in there. So you got the numbers, 500,000 plus 720,000, over $1.1 million. Okay, we're already going to spend the money. Hopefully it'll be used more wisely if we get a bond. The bond pays for the acquisition and building and everything else, but the daily operations, and I know there's questions out there, how are you going to pay for this thing? Well, the Crisis Center, if we get the approval from the state legislature, will put in $1.5 million per year for the next whatever years we come up with. What's that? It is a grant administered through the state. However we want to determine that. We think we're going to get that, but until you vote, get your legislators out there on board. That's the reason the timing is so important right now. We have that opportunity. If we don't put together a good plan, they're going someplace else, possibly in the state. So that $1.5 million, we'll have that. With the money of the judicial system, they're going to put this program together with or without this bond. They're already committed that there's a better way of dealing with alternative. They're going to already do that. The in-between stuff, I wish I could tell you per dollar how we're going to do that. But with the state funding, with what we're already paying, and with the crisis that's already out in the federal government, we feel like we're prime candidates for grant funding that will help keep that thing operational. We have a choice right now. If all of you guys have a car and lights come on in your cars that tell you need to fill up your tire, you need to change your oil, or you need something, do you do it? There's warning signals that tell you when you need to do something to your car. If you're paying attention to all of these folks who just spoke here, we have warning signals going off all over the place. We are going to be in trouble if we don't pay attention. It's cheaper right now to deal with what we've got out there and what we can do than to wait till the car blows up, overheats, and leaves ourselves out into a desert. We have a choice, and we're hoping that on November 7th, we will take the time to do what we need to do and fix the system right now. Do we have all the answers? Probably not. We're not that smart. But we have listened, and we have heard, and we're going to continue to do that. And I can tell you that we still pledge to listen to everybody here, including this kind of meeting, to figure out what we ought to do and fix what we ought to do. Thank you for all participating in this.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Okay, so we have about 35 minutes, I suppose, and we will try to work through as many of these as we can. And the folks in front of me have put these in some kind of order, and we will try to answer, and I'll try to give this mic to whomever can answer the question as best. I think I'll just work through these as best we can. If the crisis center is built, where will the funds come from for ongoing payroll and the ability to keep it running? So I think Commissioner Bullock started to answer that. We're looking forward to trying to work with the Idaho legislature to get the first couple of years worth of grant funding, which would be about $1.5 million each year for the first 2 years. After that, the state starts to reduce its funding commitment by about 5% or 10% per year to see if this communities come up with some of the batch. We're working on that piece, but it will be at least 100% state funded for the first couple of years, and we'll figure out how to work with resources after that point. That's what this question is, just the crisis center. How are you going to staff it? As we're going to have a hard time staffing local mental health places. We've got the staffing plan from RHS. You can talk a little bit about staffing for what you're using up there.
Kind of like I spoke a little bit earlier, the positions we have in the facility, we have a medical professional, which it is difficult to find RNs, which is one of the reasons we have changed and modified to where we're utilizing paramedics as well. The paramedics have a similar training as the RNs do, and they're out there in the community right now triaging often. So we currently have, I think, 5 paramedics and I think 6 RNs. And so that's how we've been able to deal with that issue a little bit more as far as the RN goes. As far as psych techs go, we've had no difficulty trying to find psych techs and recovery coaches. They're the individuals that take care of the comfort of the individuals in the facility. The case managers, we've not had difficulty filling that position either. So.
Thank you. Then the last question here is, though I would like to see this happen, I'd like to know there's a long-term plan. So at this point, I can say that the Health Trust has engaged Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, which has a mental health program, to work with the community here around a long-term behavioral health plan to look at what the needs of the community are, what we need to do, and how we could access some of the funding for it. Second question that just popped on here is, have we looked at medical marijuana for Idaho? I guess my answer there is it's beyond the scope of this bond election and probably beyond the scope of anybody here, so. But, well, that's since time is limited, we're going to pass on that one for tonight. So, you'd write to the legislators. If you're interested in that one, you need to write to legislators. What percentage of the $60 million bond will be allocated toward the jail expansion? $14 million. So basically, 7/8 of the bond goes to the jail, 1/8 of the bond would go to the behavioral care center. What percentage of the jail population is nonviolent drug offenders? Sheriff?
That's a loaded question. In other words, I don't know the answer 100%, but I know that most of the people there are returned back to the community, and I would say that's almost 80%. There are those that do go on to the prison. Anybody that goes to prison goes through the jail first, and that's just my professional, educated opinion. But most of those that come to jail are going to go right back in the community. And I'll take the opportunity to put this, is there anybody here that doesn't have a family member or a friend or acquaintance that is not involved in this crisis of addiction or mental health? And what I'm saying is that's why we need to take care of it.
Well, just okay, let me so just a moment, we got a limited amount of time, so let's, okay. Why not restructure the bail system to allow those lower income housing to be able to make bond? And I don't know that, Mr. Hong, do you want to address that one?
Thank you. This is a little sideways to this conversation because it's a little different from the bond question, but pretrial justice reform is a huge topic across our state. We expect that the Idaho Criminal Justice Commission is making recommendations about changes that can be made to our bail system to start looking at setting bail not as a factor of who can pay and who cannot pay, but more of the assessed risk of the defendant at that stage in the system. We understand that the governor's accepted and endorsed recommendations from the criminal justice system about even considering a constitutional amendment to change our bail system to try and look at taking the money out of access to justice. And so I'd expect pay close attention to the legislative session this year, pay close attention to the work of the criminal justice system, because we may see some bail reform, some pretrial justice reform in Idaho as soon as this legislative session.
So one of the questions was, why not spend $14 million on a recovery center and $2 million on the jail? So, Sheriff, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Two things, and I know this isn't what you want to hear, but those aren't hard figures. Those are, we're allocating 14 and we're allocating 2. If there's more needed on one or more needed on the other, that can be flexible. It's not locked in to that. I can tell you that jails are expensive. You guys have talked about that. I can tell you that we tried a bond last time, and everybody said we need treatment. But I can also tell you that there is almost everybody that goes into treatment is going to have some relapse. And there are also victims because of those relapse. It's not that we have mentally ill that are put in the jail. That's illegal. But they commit crimes while they're out there, and there are victims that come with that. And there's got to be some accountability. And the jail is a place for accountability. And it's up to a judge to be able to determine which is the best place to go. They haven't had the opportunity to be able to do that, and this is giving them that opportunity.
One thing about that, we do not discount the fact that this is just a little bit of spent on that. Number one, as a county, we have the authority and our responsibility to deal with the jail. I can tell you in Albuquerque, they did put $18 million a year into the funds. The way to do that is through an initiative to get a levy for that. There's not a no that says we may need that kind of facility for mental health. We're just trying to address the immediate needs. If it is proven that we need another $5 million, if the folks in Bandit County can figure out how to spend it, we'll get it figured out. Right now in Missoula, they have basically got a facility up there that's doing just how you're recommending it. But they're 15 years down the road. They've gone to the legislature there's a regular levy set up where they can get $1 million, $2 million a year, just like an ambulance district, just like a hospital district. There are ways that we could fund that, but it's your choice as the public about how you do that. It's really not the county's responsibility. Our county's responsibility is to maintain the public safety. So we're not discounting the fact that there doesn't need to be more done. And this will spearhead a lot more future discussions. But bear in mind, you guys, all of us out there, have the opportunity to make this go farther. But it's your choice of how you do that. Okay? You okay with that? If we can get $14 million out of any way you can figure out how to do it, we'll be glad to turn that over to an institution that can do that.
But that's for, where we're talking, the bond is for brick and mortar,
Yes.
right? That, I mean,
Brick and mortar.
Brick and mortar, that's for the facility, and once that's in place, the money from the state, if that's appropriated, will go to running that facility. So, we're getting money from all different directions to keep that operating, but we need a building.
Thanks, Bill. I'll just, I'm over analytical sometimes. And I think we're simplifying a fact if you talk about 14 million and 2 million. In Idaho Falls, they just passed a bond for $63 million for a school. And so they've passed a bond for the school, but it's a lot cheaper to put the teachers in the school. It's the same, you spend a ton of money on a home and you spend less money on your utilities. You buy a car that's extremely expensive and your gas is a lot less expensive. You've got to have a facility to work from. And so I think to try to say, hey, I need 14 million and flip those, it just doesn't work analytically. We do not need $14 million to run a crisis center. We don't. We need 1.2 to 1.5.
So I just wanted to speak very briefly about how the financing is divided, and because I'm not someone who's an advocate for more jail, but if we look at this and you hear the adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and I hear what's being said out here is they want to, there's a strong desire to shift the funding priorities, but unfortunately we can't go back 22 years in the past and start thinking about and implement the interventions historically that we're trying to do now. We need a new jail because of where decisions that were made 22 years ago. What we can do right now is start applying that ounce of prevention, whether that's the 2 million or whatever the amount is that comes out of the bond that goes towards the crisis center and the transition center. We can start applying that ounce of prevention looking forward to the next 20 years for the potential bond or potential jail expansion that your kids or your grandkids might end up paying. And so that's kind of the conversation we're having right now. We can't go back and change the decisions that happened 22 years ago, but we can think about what we're going to have the next generation face 22 years from now.
Yeah, let Let me just, you want,
I do. So to echo Carrie, our troubles and our problems and our roadblocks will always find a way to creep into our path moving forward. But other cities in our state, other county facilities, I shouldn't have said cities, other county facilities have jails that make it a little easier as an inmate. Speaking from an inmate standpoint, Bannock County is one of the places I do not want to revisit. However, there were other counties that made it a little bit more okay. And we're talking about a facility that makes it okay. We're not saying everyone wants to go to jail. Everyone should go to jail. I think the idea that it's a place that we want to be for treatment, probably nobody agrees with. However, when you're the inmate that is in there and you're in some of the other counties who have a little bit better beds, who have a little bit nicer, dare I say it while I'm being recorded, underwear, mattresses, food, if I didn't want to be there, I shouldn't have committed the crime that I committed. That's my bad. It's my responsibility then to grow up and to fix it. And I think that that's a part of recovery, is taking that accountability, which we just heard about. But while you're taking that accountability and you're taking stock of the choices that you made and you're making a commitment to yourself not to make them again, there are moments where you look around the Bannock County Jail, and if you're like me and you're an inmate who saw a lot of county jails because you were being transported, you know that the Bannock County Jail needs to be upgraded. Spending that money is giving those families who have inmates an easier time on the outside, because an inmate who's happy incarcerated finds that hope, makes that determination to move forward with their life, rather than sitting back in misery and feeling, oh, sorry for myself. I'm a victim of everything that's happened to me in my entire life. I had the privilege of going to a facility that was a little bit nicer, a lot nicer than the Bannock County Jail. And in that facility, suddenly counseling started making sense. Treatment started making sense. Finding my higher power started connecting. And my recovery began the moment that I took stock of my own life. It begins with hope. Hope is believing that there's a better tomorrow. That jail cell, it can provide hope.
thank you. Just as a reminder, this bond election is about a building, 2 buildings. One building is a jail. Jail is expensive no matter what. The other building is for behavioral health services. It is not as expensive because it doesn't have to have the infrastructure. Part 2 are the operating costs. This state does not fund treatment the way it should. You can fund treatment by either getting state funds, which it should do, or you can fund levies at a county level, which some communities around the country have done. That's probably another uphill fight, but even if you do a levy, you still need a place to do the service. Without the place, a levy's not going to do as much good. So, as I said at the beginning, the bond is a starting point. Question: how is Hope and Recovery involved with the county on this project, and what will their role be if and when the center would be ready? I can give it to you, unless you want to stick it to Chris.
I don't know. Chris, do you want to answer a question? My executive director is going to defer to me. So how we are currently already involved with the Bannock County Jail with the diversionary court program. We work closely with all of the diversionary court programs to provide the place and the location where people on those programs can get their community service hours. So we give them the projects and the availability. The other thing that we do for those court participants is that we sign their green cards. They have to attend so many meetings per month in order to be able to meet their requirements for their diversionary court programs, and we provide the meeting space and the signatures for those programs. We also provide recovery coaches for those participants in those programs. One of the fascinating parts of my job is that we have the privilege of expanding as we get more money from the county and as we get more money from federal grants that have come down for such things like the IROC grant, which is the Idaho Response to the Opioid Crisis. Hope and Recovery is built on this concept that it is peer support. What does peer support mean? As I explained before, we're in it together. So we have the ability of providing any service that I think our people need in our recovery center. I've never taken a concept to my board of directors and said, hey, this is something I want to do, and had them say no. So being involved with everything, I think it's just a matter of finding a resource, finding a connection, and being able to essentially explain how recreation is quality for recovery.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to have more questions in time, I can tell. Question, online, the bond is for $16 million based on the sheriff's explanation. The funds could go either way. How can we trust that $2 million will go to the, it says to the true bond, I'm assuming go to the recovery center. Mr. Commissioner, how do we trust that the money will be split the right way?
Well, part of that is we're obligated. Anytime we put something on our ballot, we have some legal watchdogs making sure that the resolution is. To tell you the truth, we think the jail will cost a little bit less than that. We have not got any architecturals. It's legally we can't do that yet. But we already have contacted an architect who has already designed 2 or 3 other jails. So we have a conceptual. We know what it could look like. We know initially what it cost is. Hopefully the jail will come in under budget, and so if we need to, we could actually put a little bit more in that. But again, that's why if you'll read the bond language, it says a total of 16. So unfortunately, if you vote, you have to have a certain amount of trust for the commissioners. And I can tell you, if I didn't think this was the way to go, I wouldn't even be pushing this or asking your vote for it. Not going to tell you got to trust me. You know how far that'll get you. So,
I guess what I would say is that there's no way you can nail down a hard number, but I know in this case, when you looked, if I go backwards on this, look at the list of community resources up there of people who have been working on this project together. So I think there's an absolute commitment that the building for the behavioral care center is not going to get short-shrifted in this process. Because if it did, I would guess that Commissioner Bullock would have even less hair than he does right now. Anyway, I think there's an absolute strong commitment that this is absolutely a piece of this puzzle. Question, how will this new treatment facility affect the current courts currently being used, like the DUI court, the Wood court, the mental health court?
One of the opportunities that we'll realize through this bond, through the implementation of the transition center, is to kind of address what our long-term future is for problem-solving courts and treatment for problem-solving courts in the 6th Judicial District. We really have valued historically the participation and the investment of our private nonprofit treatment providers who are out there. At the same time, we're recognizing that we have both some quality assurance opportunities to improve, and then also the ability to provide a more comprehensive system of care for all the participants who are in our problem-solving courts. So part of our analysis in here is, does the transition center allow us to bring treatment in-house? And so one of our conversations is looking at, can we implement a system of care where we have a higher degree of quality assurance, a higher degree of consistency of care among our treatment providers, and use the transition center or house this in the transition center. What we'd have an opportunity there would be is to help with some key shared positions help with some of the overhead cost of running the program, and go ahead and really be focused on what's the best outcome for the participants who are in our problem-solving courts. So part of this is really facing what does the future hold, and what opportunities do we have to improve and to really look at our ultimate goals with problem-solving courts. To be very frank with this group who's assembled because of your interest, when we look across the entire district, our system of care for problem-solving court participants has experienced a lot of instability recently. We've had private providers who have had challenges with maintaining their licensure, with maintaining their certification under Business Psychology Associates to continue to provide treatment. We value continuity of service and the continuum of care for our participants, and so we want to look at every opportunity to ensure that they're receiving the highest quality of treatment, and treatment that, frankly, is matched to the needs that they have when they're assessed to come into these problem-solving courts. So to be real honest, it may have a dramatic change on the treatment providers who are currently doing services for our problem-solving courts. But know, as we look and evaluate these changes, our first and highest priority is to look at the quality of care, the amount of care, and the reliability of care that's afforded to these folks who, besides being in problem-solving courts, would be in our prisons or in our jails.
Thank you.
Out there that put a lot of time, energy, and heart, and they are compliant with what the state makes them.
So I would think that those providers that are compliant would be part of the solution, not part of the problem. Let me give. Let me give Judge Dunn just a second here, because he's here and he's may provide a comment upon how this whole process might have an impact on the judicial system and hit the resources that are available to him.
Thank you. I was hoping you wouldn't call on me, but here I am. Let me just from two perspectives. One, judges are required to do sentencing, dispose of probation violations, make decisions as to whether a person should be in jail, whether they should be in the community, where they should be. It's a sacred trust. It's a difficult responsibility, but it's a duty that we have. And so when we're making those decisions, judges take into account 4 factors. One is protection of society. Are our neighborhoods safe? Are the people in our communities feeling that the judges are responding to the safety concerns that they have in their neighborhoods? That's the #1 priority. Secondly, there's a punishment factor to committing crimes. Thirdly, there's a deterrence factor to committing crimes. We want to deter people from committing more crimes. And fourth is we want to rehabilitate the offender that's in front of us. And how can we best do that? That's the 4th factor. And when we address that concern, that brings in the 2nd prong of the way we address things. Every Wednesday, I came here today from what's called Wood Court. I preside over a mental health court every Wednesday morning and over a Wood Court every Wednesday afternoon. And I started at 8 o'clock this morning, and I finished at 6 o'clock tonight. And then we have over 60 people in those 2 courts. And that's the rehabilitation piece. I would absolutely love to be able to put more people into some kind of treatment program. I hear what you're saying. I hear this every day. And I would love to do that. I don't have the resources. I don't have the ability to do it. This is a wonderful piece without taking away from any of the wonderful treatment providers we already have in our community. Bill and others, great treatment providers. We're not trying to do anything to them. They provide a service that is so valuable and so important. By the same token, Judge Nafs and I in the last few weeks, our caseloads that we've been dealing with in just the last few weeks. Last Monday, he had 85 cases on a Monday morning. His normal caseload on a Monday morning would be 30. Mine would be 30 or 35. I had 55. The week before, 65. And in order to fill the protection of society piece and to hold people accountable for crimes that are occurring in our community and making sure that our neighborhoods are safe, I have to have a good place to put them. And that's a jail. And I need more beds. And no, we are not taking a position on whether you should vote yes or no. That's not the court's job. But I can tell you what I need. I can tell you what we all need. And we need both pieces in order to facilitate and respond to the serious concerns that we have in our community today. And so when this group of people and Carrie came to me and said, this is what we're thinking about doing, all I said was, hallelujah. We need this. But that's up to you. I'm not taking a position. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who's going to be able to access services? Does one have to be in the justice system to participate, or can they proactively seek help? Who wants to cover? I know in the crisis center, anyone can walk in that door. In the transitional services, who wants to answer this one? Carrie's going to answer this one real quick.
So when we think about the crisis center, absolutely welcome, voluntary, anyone come up the street. When we talk about transition services, there's going to be a community resource component, as Commissioner Bullock indicated, is open to anyone who is looking for help in terms of understanding of what's available in the community and what resources they can be tied into. When we talk about some of the beds in the transition center and the services that are there, we're looking for people who are at risk of jail and risk of incarceration, because part of our goal here is to reduce the number of people who are guests of Sheriff Nelson. So we are focusing on people who are at risk of jail for our people who would otherwise be in the SHARE program to be using the beds in the transition center, people who are potentially lack the stability, who would otherwise be incarcerated to use the services in the transition center. So there's really those two components.
Real quick. Pardon me? I don't know that at the crisis center there is no cost. The transition center, I think that's to be determined.
Part of it is looking at the individual's ability to pay. Often we have either Medicaid or a funding stream that's tied to them, whether it's BPA, state funding, whatever we can do. And we're going to try and access all available services to bring back as revenue to help support the continued existence of the transition center.
We've got about 5 minutes left, I'm told. So, we'll try to be as brief as we can and get through as many of these questions. It will be an upgrade to the medical staff of the jail so inmates are given their medications properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have a doctor and I have nurses. Doctor comes in 2 times a week. I have nurses that pass out the medication. We've come a long way from where we were when we started. But yes, that contract, the more people that we have in, yes, we will be able to staff that. And part of the, excuse me, this is my hand working before my mouth. Part of the bond is to help broaden that facility where they're being treated.
Okay, Carrie, I think this one is for you quickly. My concern is a veteran treatment court with the recovery center taking over the drug courts. What qualification will the counselors have in regards to treating traumatic brain injury and combat PTSD?
That's a deep question. Whenever we've talked about clinical staff at the transition center when they're associated to problem-solving courts, we're all of our staffing models and all of our approaches that has been planning at looking at folks who are clinicians. And so clinical is a master's level behavioral health person. Right now, I think we have some of those in the community, but we'd sure like to see a lot more of them, and that is the staffing model that we're looking at for problem-solving court treatment. When we look at how those services are planned and delivered for all of our problem-solving court participants, there's an in-depth clinical and a behavioral assessment that happens, and then there's an individualized treatment plan. part of our commitment in problem-solving courts is to understand those factors that are a part of that person's clinical program, and then also to help reduce recidivism. And so if someone demonstrates that they have needs for treatment for post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury, we partner with our clinicians, we partner with the VA and other resources that are available to vets, because we know addressing those needs are a key part of their long-term recovery.
Thank you. Sheriff, a couple quick questions here because I'm going to run out of time. Do we take out-of-county prisoners?
Out-of-county prisoners, no. We used to. All of those contracts have been, all of those contracts have been canceled. The only contract that I have is with the United States government, the U.S. Marshals, and those are inmates from our area here. They're not from other states. They're just, we have Fort Hall and we have crimes in our area here. And the U.S. court is here. And so, yes, I have 15 beds that they contract with me. That's it.
Who pays for those federal prisoners that are in the county jail? Federal government pays. So, let me keep moving on. What is the county commitment to the crisis center if the bond should fail?
Shame on anybody for giving that question. We're not planning on it fail. However, if it does, we're still committed to it. In order to get this crisis center, the county or the city has to be the physical agent. Since the county's already the physical agent for the jail, we feel it totally comfortable for us, and the county is willing to be the physical agent for the crisis center. We're moving forward with the crisis center one way or the other. We just feel the plan to do it all at the same time gives us the best option. So we're fully committed to that.
Okay, let's see here. Will there be a minimum or maximum amount of time expected for each individual to be integrated back into the community? My expectation simply is that's based upon the needs of each individual. That's a fairly, in terms of jail beds, basically these questions, the only out-of-county, we don't take any out-of-county folks. We hold some county residents are in the federal system. When the new jail, if the jail is expanded, we still won't be taking out-of-county folks. We take care of our own folks, is that right? Unless the opportunity and you have the...
I'm certainly not going to do it now. That's counterproductive. I'm certainly not going to do it now. If we build, or if we're able to get this bond, that might be an option, but I'm not going to base everything on that. That's because the other jails are just as full as we are.
What are the provisions to detox other than jail or ER?
Currently in the crisis center, there's two types of detox. There's a medical detox and there's a social detox as well. Medical detox is not something that is going to be able to be in any of these facilities. It requires a medical facility. Social detox is something we currently do in Idaho Falls in our crisis center. Every single day we have multiple people detoxing from various substances, whatever that might be. There is some funding. Carrie spoke to some ideas of how to leverage funding. There's funding through Optum, there's funding through BPA, there's funding through Blue Cross. Some of those things where we are in Idaho Falls is currently preparing to be able to bill for some of those services. But that social detox piece can happen and does happen every day in Idaho Falls.
I just got the time's up sign. Okay, well, there are a couple more questions, but first let me thank everyone for your time, your attention, your commitment, your interest, your questions tonight. I hope you learned some things. We'll put a lot of this stuff on the Alliance page and on the Bannock County Bond US page. Again, this bond is about 2 buildings. The one building is for renovation and expansion of a jail. The second building is for a behavioral care center that will handle transition services, and a crisis center. There's been a lot of talk about a continuum of care. That really is based upon a potentially increased funding at the state level or potentially a levy downstream. You've heard a lot today. I think there's a commitment from a lot of the partners that have looked at this project to say that we need to do better in Bannock County. We need to do better for the safety of our community. We need to do better for the health of our community. We think, and I can speak for myself, we think this is a good start. It is not an end. It is nothing but a start. The buildings give us something to build on. We still need a better array of treatment services. We bet in a better continuum of services, but we have to start someplace, and this is one way to do it. The election is November the 7th. Get out and vote. You can start voting tomorrow morning if you'd like. We want to thank you all for coming tonight and appreciate your interest and attendance. You can still send questions through our Facebook page. You can still send questions to the county commissioners, and we'll try to answer those as best we can. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your attendance, and we appreciate your time tonight.